Now, a man who kept a girl as a slave in his cellar in Salford for almost a decade has been found guilty of rape. 84-year-old Ilyas Ashar and his wife Talat trafficked the girl, who was deaf and mute, from Pakistan when she was around 10. Mr. Ashar hid her in the cellar, forced her to cook and clean, and sexually abused her. The young woman, who had to give her evidence through sign language, was in the witness box for 36 days, raising questions about the ordeal of victims in sexual abuse trials. Well, joining me now to talk about this further, Conservative MP Nicola Blackwood, who sits on the Home Affairs Select Committee and has set up a campaign calling for tighter laws to stop child exploitation. Nicola, obviously this is a hugely distressing case, but made that much more distressing when you hear that the young, vulnerable victim spent 36 days in the witness box. I mean, it's hardly believable, is it?
Well, it isn't, Kathy, and I think we must pay great tribute to her bravery. I don't think any of us can imagine just how much courage it takes to give evidence against your abusers when you've been trafficked into this country, raped and subjected to nothing less than domestic slavery. And I also think that we have to give credit to the CPS, the police and the social services for overcoming the incredible challenges of this case and achieving a conviction. But, you know, even with special measures and intermediaries, she was 36 days on the stand, and we've got to do better, because we're only going to prosecute more of these cases if we are supporting vulnerable witnesses better. The NSPCC came out with startling figures which show that only 2% of young witnesses are given the support of intermediaries, and even though there are 23,000 sexual crimes against children, only 4,051 this year were actually prosecuted.
OK, and as you know from the Bullfinch trial in your own constituency, she's by no means the only victim who has been treated in this way by the courts. What can you in Parliament do to stop this kind of thing happening again?
Well, there was already a lot of progress being made, and the Home Office has put together a special task force to deal with child sexual exploitation. They've put in place a pilot to allow young vulnerable witnesses to pre-record evidence on video so that they don't actually have to go through the trauma of a trial, which is excellent news. The problem is that we actually legislated for this to happen 14 years ago, and it took 14 years for us to even trial it. So we need to get a move on and roll this out across the country.
Why wasn't that adopted earlier?
There was a lot of concern that this would undermine the ability for cross-examination. I'm afraid that I just don't think that's acceptable, and we need to put the balance back in play so that victims are better protected. We're also going to see new specialist judges, but we also need to see an end to over-aggressive cross-examination by multiple defence barristers, and I'm afraid I think we should have multiple training on sex we should have mandatory training on sex offences for defence barristers, so we see an end to situations like we saw in August of victims being labelled as predatory in cases.
Nicola Blackwood, thank you very much for joining me.